Shabbat Shalom. So here we are, the week before Thanksgiving, and many of us may have changed our plans from what we had figured we would do to give thanks and celebrate Thanksgiving with our family this year. I myself have been meeting with my younger son and daughter on FaceTime to try and figure out if we're going to meet in person or Zoom or whatever we're going to do. And during those conversations, I happened to mention that I hadn't been sleeping very well. And my son, who has no children, said to my daughter, who has a 4-year-old, "Oh, you must have no problem sleeping." To which we both laughed. We're both mothers. And I remember when I was raising my 3 children, how sleep was a rare commodity. It wasn't that I wasn't tired. It's just that when the children were sleeping, that was my time to do other stuff. So Alexandra, my daughter, laughed, and I started to think about what it was like to stand in the place of another person. I tried to do that quite often, and my son was obviously trying to empathize with his sister. This week's Torah portion is very difficult for me to unpack. I've read it all my life from the time I was about 6 or 7 years old. And it has such a melodrama of parental favoritism and sibling rivalry and deceit. And yet it's not just a narrative like that. It's more than that. It also is a precursor to tell us how we became the chosen people. And my process for reading a Torah portion is first I read the text, and then I go to the commentaries, because that gives me a perspective from long ago, because the sages wrote between 250 before the Common Era to 625 of the Common Era. And it gives us a different way of looking at things and answering the questions that might come up. You know, every generation thinks differently about things that came before. So as I was reading Toldot, which begins, Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Abraham, these are the chronicles of Isaac, the son of Abraham, so many questions came up. We meet Isaac at the age of 40. He marries Rebecca. And then we read that she's barren. And then we read that she gets pregnant and she has twins. She feels them struggling inside her. And God tells her she's having twins. They're going to be fathers of 2 great nations, and that the older will serve the younger. We go on to read about their names. Esau, who was said to be red complected and hairy, and then Jacob, who came out grasping Esau's heel. We read about the personalities of each child, that Esau was a hunter and Jacob was Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. He sat in the tents and he read. He was a student. He studied. So then we read a little further about Esau, when he came in from hunting, really being famished and asking Jacob to give him some stew. And Jacob offered to give him the stew if Esau would sell him his birthright in exchange. The eldest son always got the birthright, the blessing from the parent. And Esau thought to himself, what good is a birthright to me when I'm hungry? So he sells his birthright to Jacob. Then we read about Isaac dying, and Jacob, encouraged by his mother, deceives Isaac into thinking that he's Esau so that he can get the blessing. Legally, it was his, but morally, it wasn't the right thing to do, at least from our perspective of reading this story. Rebecca helps him put on a hairy shirt, and Isaac, even though he suspects that it's Jacob, he's deceived by the hairy shirt, and he gives Jacob the blessing. Then Esau comes in, and Isaac gets really angry that he's been deceived. And Esau is upset, and Isaac, in his love for Esau, gives him another blessing, a different blessing. Despite being angry, Isaac gives Jacob another blessing and dispatches him off to Haran. The questions that I think about is, why did God tell Rebecca and not Isaac? And that's a question that the sages answer. Why didn't she share with her husband when she knew that she was expecting these twins? And why did Esau show contempt for his birthright and then regret selling it? And if Esau was so evil, why did he crave his father's blessing? And why did Jacob need to deceive in order to receive Isaac's blessing? And if Isaac was annoyed with Jacob, why give him an even better blessing before dispatching him off to Haran? The sages answer these questions. They say that Isaac knew that Esau was no saint and quickly became aware that Jacob would continue his father Abraham's spiritual tradition. They tell us that Isaac loved Esau and he tried to encourage him by showing him love. They tell us that based on Isaac's own experience with his father Abraham, he mistakenly thought that Jacob wouldn't need any protection from Esau. Rebecca, however, understood this. She understood it in her pregnancy. She grew up in Haran, which was full of political intrigue and deceit and greed and even murder. She knew it was necessary for Jacob to learn how to act like Esau without actually becoming Esau. The traditional character of the people Israel is Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim, the people who, of the book, the people who sit in the tents and study. But to survive all the exiles that we have survived, we've needed a practical dose of political reality. The sages knew this. Our personal struggle is not limited just to us and them. Like Rebecca, we have this internal struggle of how we're going to stand in someone else's place, of how we're going to survive. As we move forward into the Thanksgiving week and into our future at the end of 2020, let us remember to perhaps be the sages for the generation that's coming after us, for the children that are born this year, the ones that are the 4-year-olds this year. Let's try and stand in the shoes of our brothers and our sisters and forge a way forward in empathy and understanding so that the world that we leave them will be safer and kinder. And when they look back with their questions, we can explain why we acted as we did and why we need to stand in the shoes of the other person with understanding. Shabbat Shalom.